His life was built on a lie. Every single piece of it. The empire, the marriage, the image everyone saw. All of it built on deception so complete that he couldn't even see it coming. Marcus stood in his office on the 75th floor, watching the city sprawl beneath him like it belonged to him. 3 continents, billions in assets, a manufacturing empire that had taken 2 decades to build and only moments to destroy. The phone on his desk rang. No number. He almost didn't answer, but something told him this call would change everything. And he was right. That voice on the other end would set off a chain reaction that would tear down every wall he'd built, expose every lie he'd been living, and force him to choose between the image he'd spent his entire life protecting and the actual life he could still save. If he was brave enough. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time ITIS. We want to know where you are right now. And drop a comment. Are you at home? At work? On your break? Tell us in the comments below. But before we go deeper into this story, I need you to do 3 things. First, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is dedicated to stories about real transformation, about people who had everything and lost it all, only to discover what actually mattered. Second, hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single story like this one. And third, if this story hits you in a certain way, like it. Your likes help us reach more people who need to hear these lessons. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever built a life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt empty on the inside? Have you ever wondered what you would do if everything you believed about your marriage, your success, your future, what if all of it was a lie? Have you ever chosen image over authenticity and then realized, years later, that it cost you everything? This is Marcus's story, and it's about to get worse before it gets better. 2 months earlier, things seemed different. His wife had announced she was pregnant. Finally, after years of saying the timing wasn't right, of explaining why a baby didn't fit with her lifestyle, she was ready. Or so he thought. But there were cracks in the story. Small things that didn't add up. Her pregnancy looked different than he expected. She barely showed. She talked about the baby in a way that felt rehearsed, like she was reading lines from a script instead of speaking from her heart. He was too distracted to notice. Too busy closing the biggest deal of his career. Too focused on winning to pay attention to losing. But someone was paying attention. Someone he hadn't heard from in 2 years. Someone from his past who couldn't stay silent anymore. And when that person finally reached out, Marcus would discover that the lie wasn't just about pregnancy. It went deeper, much deeper. So what happens next? When a man with billions in the bank loses his marriage, his reputation, and his image in a single day. When he discovers that hidden children exist, his children being raised without him, when he has to choose between protecting his pride and saving his life. Stay with us as we explore the moment that broke a billionaire. The moment he had to ask himself, was it worth it? Was any of it worth it? You won't believe what he chose, and you won't believe what he found on the other side of that choice. Don't go anywhere. This story is about to get intense. The penthouse was silent at midnight. Just Marcus, just the city lights reflected in the glass. Just the weight of a life that looked perfect, but felt like a prison. He stood with a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand, the kind that cost more than most people made in a week. The view was supposed to make him feel powerful. Instead, it made him feel alone. Vanessa appeared behind him, silk robe brushing against the expensive carpet. She was beautiful, perfect, the kind of woman that belonged in magazines and business galas. She was also a stranger. He'd known that for years, but he'd convinced himself it didn't matter. They had an arrangement. She played the part of his wife. He played the part of the ambitious billionaire. They both won, or at least that's what he told himself. "You're thinking too much again," she said, wrapping her arms around him. Her touch was calculated, not intimate. Everything about her was calculated. Marcus turned to face her. 10 years of marriage had taught him how to read the surface of her expressions, without ever understanding what was underneath. That should have been his first clue. A real marriage meant knowing someone. It meant being known. This was just performance. Just tired, he said. It wasn't true, but it was what she wanted to hear. "The Ashford deal?" she asked, pulling away slightly. She was already bored with this conversation. Bored with him. That was nothing new. You need to learn how to separate work from your personal life, Marcus. You can't let the company consume you. He almost laughed at the irony. She was the one who had separated their marriage from real intimacy years ago. She was the one who had become an accessory to his success instead of a partner in it. But he didn't say that. He never said things like that anymore. "Maybe you're right," he said. Instead, she touched his face with manicured fingers, and he noticed her nails were freshly done. Everything about Vanessa was freshly maintained. Nothing about her was real. "I wanted to tell you something tonight," she said, her voice casual, like she was discussing the weather. "I've been off my birth control for 3 months now. We're going to try for a baby." The world shifted. A baby. A real child. Something he'd wanted for years, but had given up on, believing that Vanessa had made it clear she wasn't interested in motherhood. Her career in social media came first, she'd explained. Her body was her brand, she'd said. The timing was never right. But now, suddenly, it was. He paused, searching for words that felt authentic. "That's wonderful, Vanessa. Really wonderful." She smiled. It was the smile she used for Instagram posts and business events. Practiced. Perfect. Empty. "A baby will change everything," she said. "It will make us real." There was something deeply wrong with that statement. He felt it, but he was too tired, too distracted, too committed to the lie to examine it. So instead, he held her, and he wondered if she understood the irony of what she just said. A baby wouldn't make them real. A baby would cement their performance further. They would become the perfect family for the cameras. They would perform parenthood the way they performed their marriage. Everything would be just a little more polished. Just a little more fake. But maybe, he thought, maybe a child could change things. Maybe it would force them both to become honest. Maybe it would be the catalyst they needed. He didn't know then that Vanessa was already building a lie even more complicated than the one they were living. He didn't know that his wife wasn't actually pregnant. He didn't know that right now, right at this moment, someone else was carrying his child, 2 of them, and was about to tell him the truth was coming, and it was about to destroy everything he'd built. 2 months later, Marcus noticed things that didn't add up. Small things, inconsistencies that should have alarmed him, but didn't, because he was too deep in his work to pay attention. Vanessa barely showed. She'd bought a whole maternity wardrobe, but she kept wearing her regular clothes. She talked about the baby in a way that felt scripted, like she was reading lines for a role, instead of speaking about her own child. She scheduled doctor's appointments, but never seemed to need to reschedule them around her schedule. There was a quality of performance to the whole thing. A theater, a stage. Marcus was too distracted to care. The Ashford acquisition had consumed him. Millions of dollars, thousands of lives affected by the decisions he made. New factories in 3 countries, supply chains that needed to be restructured, investors who needed reassurance, competitors who wanted to destroy him. His marriage was background noise. His wife was a prop. He told himself he was being a supportive husband by not hovering, by trusting her to manage her own pregnancy. But the truth was simpler than that. He just didn't care enough to look too closely. He didn't care enough to ask questions. That was about to change. The phone call came on a Tuesday. No number. He was in the middle of a board meeting when his assistant knocked and told him someone had called multiple times, said it was urgent. He shouldn't have taken it. He should have let it go to voicemail. But something in the tone of his assistant's voice made him excuse himself from the meeting and take the call. Marcus, it's Thea. The folder of acquisition documents fell from his hands. His entire world stopped. Thea. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 2 years. He'd worked hard to forget that voice. He'd spent years convincing himself that it didn't matter that he'd chosen his career and his image over the woman who actually understood him. She was his past, his mistake, his biggest regret. Thea, he said. His voice sounded strange, foreign, like it belonged to someone else. How dare I found your assistant's contact information, she said quickly. I wouldn't have called unless She paused. There, something different in her voice. Older. Weighted with something he couldn't name. I need to tell you something. In person. It's important. Every instinct told him this was dangerous. That hearing her voice again, seeing her face again, would destabilize everything he'd constructed. His marriage, his image, his entire carefully balanced life. But there was something in her tone that wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It was urgency mixed with something that sounded like concern. Where? He heard himself ask. There's a coffee shop on 5th. The Corner Brew. Tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. Before your day starts. Can you do that? He should have said no. He should have hung up the phone and erased this call from his memory. He should have protected his marriage, his image, his carefully constructed life. Instead, he said yes. And in that moment, he set off a chain reaction that would change everything. He just didn't know it yet. The Corner Brew hadn't changed in 4 years. Same faded green walls. Same mismatched furniture that looked like it had been collected from different decades. The same broken espresso machine that gurgled like it was dying every time someone ordered a double shot. Marcus arrived early, claiming a corner table. He sat with his back to the wall, the way he always did in public. Control, strategy, never putting himself in a position where someone could ambush him. But Thea wasn't here to ambush him. She was here to tell him something that would ambush him far more effectively than any surprise attack ever could. When she walked through the door, he realized he'd been frozen in time with his memory of her. But time had moved on. She looked different, stronger, more herself. The blonde polish he'd expected to see in his memory was gone. Her curly hair was still wild, still untamed by products or styling. She wore simple clothes, nothing expensive, nothing designed to impress. But there was something in her eyes, something that spoke of hard years and hard choices, something that looked like wisdom earned through pain. She sat across from him and didn't waste time with pleasantries or small talk. Thea had never been good at performance. That was partly why he'd left her. I'm going to tell you something, she said quietly, and I need you to listen without interrupting. What I'm about to say will shock you. Your first instinct will be to deny it. I need you to just listen. Can you do that? Marcus nodded. He couldn't trust his voice right now. 2 years ago, we had a one-night stand. Thea continued. You were in town for a conference. We ran into each other at a hotel bar. We were both drunk. We were both lonely. We had one night together, and then you went back to your wife, and I went back to my life. Marcus did remember this. Sort of a blur of whiskey and nostalgia, a moment of weakness where he'd felt something he hadn't felt in years, a night where he'd been himself instead of performing. He'd convinced himself afterward that it hadn't happened, or that it had happened with someone else, someone whose name he didn't need to remember. It had been Thea. Of course, it had been Thea. "I got pregnant," she said. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the weight behind every word. The years of making a choice that no woman should have to make alone. "I had the baby. Actually, I had babies. Twins, a son and a daughter." Marcus felt the world tilt. Twins. His twins. Children that existed because of a night he'd tried to forget. Children that were his by genetics, but complete strangers in every other way. "They're 16 months old," Thea continued. "Their names are Xavier and Aria. They have your eyes and my stubbornness. They're smart and kind and beautiful, and they deserve to know their father." "Thea," Marcus said. His voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were married," she said simply. "Because I was angry at you. Because I spent the first year telling myself I was protecting my children by keeping you out of their lives. But I was really just protecting my own pain. And now I can't do that anymore." She pulled out her phone and showed him pictures, a little boy with his features and her smile, a little girl with her curly hair and his stubborn chin. They were perfect. They were his, and he'd missed every moment of their existence. "I'm telling you now," Thea said, "because I've learned something these last 16 months. Keeping this secret has been poisoning me from the inside out. It's poisoning my relationship with my children, and I can't do it anymore. They deserve to know you, and you deserve to know them. So, here we are." Marcus didn't remember standing up. He didn't remember moving, but suddenly he was standing outside the coffee shop, his hands shaking, his entire world fracturing into pieces. Twins. He had twins. His life had divided into two realities, and he was standing in the moment where the two would collide. This was the beginning of the end. This was the moment everything would change. And he had no idea how much worse it was going to get. Marcus didn't go back to the office. He didn't call his assistant. He didn't answer any of the 17 calls that came from his lawyer, his business partners, his publicist. He just drove through the city, barely paying attention to where he was going, thinking about two children who existed because of a moment he'd tried to erase. When he finally made it home, Vanessa was in her home office, as usual. She was recording content for her social media, laughing at something on her phone, speaking to thousands of strangers about her perfect life while their marriage crumbled around them. She looked up when he came in. Something flickered across her face when she saw his expression. A moment of concern, maybe, or calculation. "We to talk," Marcus said. "Can wait?" Vanessa asked, turning back to her phone. "I'm in the middle of scheduling posts for the week. The pregnancy announcements are performing really well. I'm getting brand partnerships. Real money, Marcus. The kind of money that changes things." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. "You're posting about the pregnancy?" Of course, Vanessa said. Like this should have been obvious to him. I've been documenting the journey. It's beautiful content. People are absolutely obsessed with watching a woman's pregnancy unfold. I'm thinking of doing a whole series. The nursery, reveal, the maternity fashion journey, the birth story. I could even launch a baby product line. Have you thought about what we should name the baby? Something cute, but sophisticated. The casual cruelty of it took his breath away. She was monetizing their marriage. She was selling the story of a baby that didn't exist. Are you actually pregnant? He asked quietly. Vanessa set down her phone. She looked at him like he'd asked the most ridiculous question in the world. No, she said simply. I'm not pregnant. How long were you planning to fake this? 3 months, she said. I would have done a miscarriage announcement. Very tasteful. A lot of engagement. Supportive comments from my followers. People get emotional about that stuff. It's actually one of the most compelling narratives. Everyone would have felt so sorry for us. I could have pivoted to a whole healing journey narrative after that. The possibilities were endless. Marcus sat down because his legs didn't feel like they would hold him anymore. Why? He asked. Why would you do this? Vanessa sighed, like he was being dense. Because I was paying attention to you, Marcus. I noticed you were unhappy. I could see it, and I thought if I gave you a baby, if I gave you something to focus on, you'd stay. You'd be so wrapped up in fatherhood that you wouldn't even notice that I was checked out of this marriage. You were going to trap me with a false pregnancy to keep me in the marriage. I was going to keep my marriage secure, Vanessa corrected. She said it like it was reasonable, like there was no cruelty in it. Then I realized I didn't actually want to be pregnant. Having a baby would ruin my body and mess up my content calendar. So I decided to fake it instead. Everyone wins. You get to be a father. I get the engagement boost, and I keep my options open. Your options open, Marcus repeated slowly. For what? Derek, Vanessa said, my personal trainer. We've been seeing each other for 6 months. I'm trying to decide if I want to be with him instead of you. Having a fake pregnancy gave me time to figure it out without disrupting our arrangement. The word arrangement hung in the air between them. That's all their marriage was. An arrangement, a performance. Lie. There's one more thing you should know, Vanessa continued, and now there was an edge to her voice, a threat. If you leave me, I'll destroy you. I have 200,000 followers. They believe in me. They believe in our love story. I'll tell them that you drove me to infidelity, that you were emotionally unavailable, that you left your pregnant wife. Do you understand what happens to a man's reputation when that story gets out? Do you understand how much money that will cost you? Marcus understood perfectly. He understood that he'd married a woman who would weaponize his own ambition against him. He understood that his need to preserve his image had led him straight to someone who knew exactly how to use that image against him. And he understood that he had a choice to make right now. Stay in the performance and protect what was left of his reputation. or walk away and face the destruction head on. He thought about Xavier. He thought about Aria. He thought about two children who were real, who existed, who were waiting for a father who didn't even know they were alive. And he stood up. "I'm leaving," he said. "You can't," Vanessa said, but there was no power in her voice anymore. She was a threat he was finally willing to face. "I'll take half your fortune. I'll destroy your reputation. I'll make sure you're the villain in this story. Then I guess we'll both get destroyed," Marcus said. He walked toward door. "But at least I'll be..." And he left. He walked out of the penthouse. Quiet street in Queens looked nothing like the penthouse. No floor-to-ceiling windows, no view of the entire city. Just a modest 3-story building with a front stoop and a door that needed paint. It was the most real thing Marcus had ever seen. He sat in his car for 20 minutes before he could make himself get out. His hands were shaking. His heart was racing, like he was about to walk into a business negotiation that could cost him billions. In a way, he was. He was about to meet his own children. Two people who shared his DNA, but didn't know he existed. Thea answered the door before he could knock. She looked tired in a way that money couldn't fix. The kind of tired that came from raising twins alone, from making impossible choices, from carrying secrets that weighed more than any physical burden. "They're napping," she said. "I wanted to talk to you first about what the last 16 months have been like." They sat in her living room. The furniture was worn but comfortable. There were toys scattered on the floor, books piled on tables, evidence of actual life being lived, not performed. "When I found out I was pregnant," Thea said, "I went through every emotion you can imagine. Anger, fear, shame. I considered having an abortion. I considered adoption. But the moment I felt them moving inside me, I knew. They were mine. They were going to be my responsibility, my joy, my heartbreak." Marcus listened as she described the last 16 months, the financial struggles, despite family help, the emotional roller coaster of single motherhood, the nights she cried because she was alone, the moments when she held them and felt such desperate love that it almost broke her, the times she wanted to reach out to him, and the times she was grateful she hadn't. "My parents helped," Thea continued. "I'm blessed in ways most single mothers aren't. I got a job in project management that let me work remotely some days. I built a life. But Marcus, it was hard. Some days I didn't know if I could keep going. I owe you everything," Marcus said quietly. "No," Thea said firmly. "You don't owe me anything. But your children deserve you. That's why I'm here. That's why I told you. Not to make you feel guilty, but because they're real. They exist. And they deserve to know their father." From upstairs came the sound of a child crying out in their sleep. Then another voice joining the first. Thea stood up. "Come on," she said. "Let me introduce you to Xavier and Arya. The nursery was small. 2 cribs close together. The boy woke up when Thea came in. He rubbed his eyes with his fists and looked at Marcus with confusion. He had Marcus's eyes, the same green eyes that looked out from family photos. "This is your daddy," Thea said simply. The boy didn't understand. He was only 16 months old. He reached for his mother instead of the stranger in his room. Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest. He had missed this. He had missed everything. He had missed the first time Xavier opened his eyes in the world. He had missed his first smile, his first laugh, his first word. 16 months of moments that he would never get back. The girl woke up next. She was smaller than her brother, more delicate. But when she saw Marcus, something flickered in her expression. Not recognition. Children that young didn't have recognition. But something, maybe her body knew that this man was part of her story. Marcus held them, one at a time. They were light, impossibly light. He was terrified of breaking them, of holding them wrong, of doing something that would damage them further. He started. "Can I be in their lives? I know I have no right to ask. I know I missed so much, but can I try?" Thea looked at him for a long moment. "If you do this, you have to be all in. You can't be in and out, showing up when it's convenient. Children need consistency. They'd to know you're there." "I understand," Marcus said. "I don't think you do," Thea said gently. "But maybe you will." He would, over the next weeks and months. He would understand in a way that nothing else had ever taught him. He would understand what it meant to be needed by someone other than an investor or a board of directors. He would understand what it meant to hold something more precious than money, and to know that you could lose it if you weren't careful. The real work of his transformation was just beginning, and it would cost him far more than he imagined. 3 months later, Marcus signed the papers that ended his marriage. 6 months after that, he resigned from his position as CEO of his company. The business world watched in shock as one of the most powerful men in the country stepped away from his empire. They didn't understand. How could they? They were still measuring success the way Marcus used to, in dollars and acquisitions and power over other people. They didn't understand that he'd finally learned to measure success in something else. His daughter called him Dada. His son was learning to walk, stumbling on unsteady legs across the living room of a small apartment that Marcus had rented near Thea's brownstone. He'd given up the penthouse. He'd given up the performance. He'd given up the carefully constructed image that had defined his entire adult life. And he'd gained something that cost less money, but meant infinitely more. On Tuesday afternoons, he picked up Xavier and Arya from daycare. He brought them to his apartment, and they played with toys scattered on the floor. He made bottles with his own hands, fed them with a patience that surprised him. He sat with them during their naps, watching them sleep, trying to make up for the time he'd lost by being present for every moment he had left. The loneliness he'd felt in the penthouse was gone, replaced by a different kind of exhaustion. The kind that came from actually being needed, from actually mattering to someone beyond what he could provide financially. Thea had been right about one thing. He hadn't understood. He was understanding now. 6 months into fatherhood, he sold his stake in the company. Not all of it, but enough. He kept a seat on the board, but he stepped away from day-to-day operations. The money he made was obscene, more than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But he finally understood that money wasn't what his children needed. They needed him. He started a non-profit that provided business loans to entrepreneurs in underserved neighborhoods. The work paid almost nothing. The hours were long. The success rate was uncertain. It was the most meaningful thing he'd ever done. On the weekends, Thea would bring Xavier and Arya to his apartment. They would go to the park. They would sit on a bench and watch the children play. And sometimes, if he was brave enough, Marcus would talk about his past, about the choices that had led him here, about the person he used to be, and the person he was becoming. "Do you regret it?" Thea asked him one afternoon, watching Xavier climb on a play structure while Arya napped against her shoulder. Marcus thought carefully about the answer. It was a question he'd been asking himself for months. "I regret the choices that led to deception," he said finally. "I regret choosing image over authenticity. I regret not being here for the first 16 months. But if I could go back and change those things without changing the outcome, you, Xavier, Arya, this life we're building, I don't know if I would." "Why not?" Thea asked, surprised. "Because the outcome wouldn't exist without the mistakes," Marcus said. "Without the failure and the deception and the complete unraveling of who I thought I was supposed to be. If I'd just found the right woman and married her and had children in the conventional way, I would never have learned what I've learned. I would still be chasing an image. I would still be empty." Thea was quiet for a moment. "Do you think Vanessa will ever figure that out?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "Some people spend their whole lives running from that kind of reckoning. Others run toward it. All we can do is choose it for ourselves." That night, after Thea had taken the children home, Marcus sat alone in his small apartment and realized something. He wasn't lonely anymore. He was alone, yes, but lonely was something different. Lonely was the emptiness of the penthouse. This was just the space he occupied when his children weren't there. He could bear it because he knew they were coming back. He was building something real. Finally, after all these years, the proposal didn't happen the way Marcus had planned it. He'd imagined a romantic dinner, a moment designed to prove that he'd learned how to be thoughtful. He had a ring, a simple diamond that reflected light the way he'd finally learned to value things. without performance, without trying to impress. But life with two toddlers didn't leave much room for orchestrated moments. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in the park. Xavier was chasing pigeons, laughing at how they scattered when he got too close. Aria was pulling dandelions from the grass, her small fists full of weeds that she thought were flowers. Marcus and Thea sat on a bench, watching them play. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said. His voice sounded nervous. He wasn't used to being nervous about things that mattered. Thea turned to look at him. "I'm sorry," he continued, "for everything. For choosing ambition over you. For not being there when Xavier and Aria were born. For letting pride and fear keep me from trying to be the person I could have been." "I know," Thea said quietly. "I forgave you a long time ago." "I know that now," Marcus said, "and I'm grateful. But more than that, I want to build something with you, not out of obligation, not because we share children, but because you make me want to be a better person. Because when I'm with you, I don't have to pretend. I don't have to perform. I can just be." He pulled out the ring. "Marry me. Not because it's expected. Not because it would be good for business or image, but because I want to spend the rest of my life with someone who challenged me to be honest, even when honesty hurt. Especially when it hurt." Thea's eyes filled with tears. Not the theatrical tears of someone performing emotion. Real tears. The kind that came from genuine feeling. "Is this really what you want?" she asked. "It's the first genuinely honest thing I've wanted in years," Marcus said. "Everything else was about acquisition and accumulation and image. This is the first time I'm asking for something, because I actually need it. Need you." She said yes, and when Xavier ran over to ask what was happening, Marcus held up the ring so his son could see. "I asked your mom to marry me," Marcus explained. Levier considered this seriously. Then he nodded. "Good. Then you can live with us, and I can show you my fort every day." From her father's arms, Aria clapped her hands together, celebrating something she didn't quite understand, but could feel in the energy around her. That night, Marcus made a decision. He was going to ask Thea to move in. Not eventually. Soon. He was going to rent a bigger place. A home where Xavier and Aria could have their own rooms, but where he would be there every single night. Not some nights. The night the wedding happened 6 months later. Small. Just family. Just the people who had supported them through the hardest parts. Thea wore a simple white dress that she felt beautiful in. Not a complicated gown designed to impress. Marcus wore a suit that fit him well. Nothing more. They exchanged vows about the cost of deception and the liberation of truth. They promised to build a life based on honesty. Not the brutal performance art kind of honesty that uses truth as a weapon, but the courageous kind that admits mistakes and commits to growing from them. As he kissed his wife for the first time as a married man, Marcus realized something. This was the first marriage he'd actually chosen. The first one, built on real knowledge of who each other was. The first one that could survive because it was rooted in truth instead of image. Everything he'd lost had led him here, and he wouldn't change any of it. 5 years later, Xavier was 8 years old and wanted to be a social worker. He talked about helping other kids whose parents had made mistakes. He had an empathy that seemed born from understanding, at a deep level, that people were complicated and deserving of second chances. Arya was 6 and a creative force, painting and writing stories, imagining elaborate scenarios. She told stories about flawed characters who had to learn and grow and become better versions of themselves. Marcus suspected she was processing her own experience of having a father who'd missed her earliest years, but showed up fully for the ones that followed. The family lived in a brownstone, 3 blocks from where Thea had raised the twins alone. Big enough for everyone, big enough for the life they'd built together. Marcus's story had become more public than he'd ever intended. A journalist he'd known from his previous life did a profile on him. It explored the dramatic transformation from ruthless businessman to community-focused entrepreneur. It touched on the deception with Vanessa, the surprise discovery of his twins, the choices that led to his reinvention. The piece went viral in business and psychology circles. Business schools began using his case as a teaching example of what happens when ambition supersedes values. Therapists referenced his journey when helping clients understand the relationship between deception and depression. But the most meaningful feedback came from ordinary people. Messages from men who'd prioritized work over their families. Women who'd hidden their authentic selves to maintain relationships. People who'd built lives on shifting sand and finally understood they needed to start over. They saw themselves in Marcus's story. They saw a possibility they hadn't considered before. The nonprofit had expanded. Marcus had hired a team of people who shared his vision. They weren't getting rich, but they were changing lives. Actual lives. Real people who now had capital to start businesses, to build futures, to create meaning in their communities. The marriage between Marcus and Thea had deepened into something that continued to surprise them both. Not the passion of new love, something deeper, something built on knowing and being known, on choosing each other every day with full knowledge of who each other was. They'd built a life based on principles that had become like scripture to them. Honesty above comfort. They'd learned to have the hard conversations, to admit when they were wrong, to be vulnerable even when it felt risky. Presence over performance. Every moment was valued for what it actually was, not how it could be presented or leveraged. Growth as a commitment. They read books, went to therapy, talked endlessly about how to be better partners to each other and better parents to their children. Connection as the ultimate currency. Money mattered, but only because it allowed them to be present. Success mattered, but only because it was meaningful. Relationships were the measure of a life well lived. One evening, Marcus was helping Xavier with homework when his son looked up and asked a question that stopped him cold. "Why did you leave us?" Xavier asked. He was old enough to understand the basic facts now, old enough to ask the questions that mattered. Marcus set down the homework and took a breath. "I didn't leave you," he said carefully. "I didn't know you. Existed. But I also made choices before you were born. That meant I missed the first 16 months of your life. And that's something I have to live with. Something I'm sorry for, but you're here now," Xavier said. "I'm here now?" Marcus confirmed. "And I'm going to keep being here. Every day. For the rest of your life." That night, after the children were asleep, Marcus stood in their room and watched them. Xavier in his bed, his hand still clutching his favorite book. Arya with her stuffed animal tucked under her chin. They were growing up so fast. In a few years, they would be teenagers. Then adults. Then they would make their own choices about who they wanted to be and what kind of lives they wanted to build. He hoped they would choose authenticity. He hoped they would choose presence over performance. He hoped they would learn, much earlier than he did, that the most powerful thing a person could do was tell the truth about themselves. But that was their journey to take. His job was just to be here, to show them what it looked like, to be real, to show them that people could change, that redemption was possible, that the cost of deception was far higher than the cost of truth. If Marcus had to distill what he'd learned from the entire experience into something that actually mattered, something that went beyond his own life, it was this simple truth: deception is a temporary fix for permanent insecurity. Vanessa had lied about her pregnancy because, deep down, she didn't believe Marcus loved her for who she actually was. She believed she needed to give him something. A baby. A perfect image. To keep him. And because she didn't believe in being loved for her authentic self, she constructed an increasingly elaborate lie to convince him that she was worth keeping. Marcus had enabled it. He'd chosen her precisely because she didn't demand authenticity. He could perform being a husband without actually being one. He could construct an image of success and strength without ever being vulnerable enough to actually connect with another person. It took losing everything: his marriage, his reputation, his carefully constructed identity, to understand that the opposite of deception wasn't shame. The opposite of deception was love. Real love, built on the foundation of truly knowing and being known by another person. The story of Marcus's transformation wasn't unique. It was being lived by millions of people right now. People who were choosing, often painfully, to stop performing and start living. Who were choosing to tell the truth about their mistakes and face the consequences rather than hide behind carefully constructed narratives. And that choice, the choice to be authentic, even when authenticity costs us, is the most courageous and most important choice a person can make. Think about your own life for a moment. Are you performing? Are you hiding parts of yourself because you're afraid that if people saw the real you, they wouldn't love you? Are you building an image instead of building a life? Are you chasing success that looks good from the outside, but feels empty from the inside? This is the question that everyone eventually has to answer. The answer matters. It matters to the people you love. It matters to the person you're becoming. It matters to the life you're actually building versus the life you're pretending to live. If you watch this and you saw yourself in Marcus's story, I want you to do something for me. I want you to comment below. Tell me lie you're carrying. One way you're performing instead of being present. One choice you're afraid to make because of what other people might think. Be brave. Tell the truth. Then do the harder thing. Live it. Like this video, if it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep telling stories about people who had everything and lost it all, only to discover what actually mattered. And tell me in the comments, would you have had the courage Marcus had? Would you have walked away from billions to be an actual father? Or would you have stayed in the performance? I want to know, because your answer tells you something about your own values, about what you believe success actually is, about what you're willing to sacrifice for authenticity. Here's the truth that Marcus finally understood after everything he'd been through. After all the loss and the pain and the rebuilding, the life you build on honesty might look less impressive on social media. It might not get you magazine profiles or business school case studies. It might not be enviable or perfect or designed for performance, but it will be yours. Actually, genuinely, completely yours. And there's nothing in the world more valuable than that. If you're struggling with the choice between image and authenticity, between performance and presence, between the life that looks good and the life that feels real, know this: you don't have to choose perfection. You just have to choose truth. You don't have to be the perfect parent. You just have to be present. You don't have to have the perfect marriage. You just have to be honest. You don't have to build an empire. You just have to build something meaningful. And when you finally make that choice, when you finally step off the stage and stop performing, when you finally tell the truth about yourself, that's when the real transformation begins. That's when your life actually starts. Thanks for watching Dynasty of Dollars by Mr. John, where we celebrate the transformation from ambition to authenticity, where we tell stories about people who dared to be real. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth about yourself. Not for performance, not for sympathy, not for strategic advantage, but because truth is the foundation that everything good is built on. Everything else can crumble. Success, wealth, image, power. It can all disappear in a moment. But the truth about who you are and the courage to live aligned with that truth, that's something no one can take from you. That's something that can be built and rebuilt indefinitely. Marcus learned that the hard way. Billions in the bank couldn't protect him from the cost of deception, but the truth about his mistakes and the courage to face them that saved